I felt the orbital lasers burn my flesh to ash, the final price of a broken galactic alliance. But when I opened my eyes, my lungs filled with cold, sterile air. I wasn't dead, I was back. And this time, the alien princess wouldn't get the chance to ruin us. The fire is what I remember most. The blinding, searing white heat of plasma tearing through the bridge of the UNS Dauntless. In my previous life, that was how it ended. I was Commander Caleb Wright, humanity's sacrificial lamb, sent to the sovereign state of Ethgard to secure our survival through an arranged marriage with their royal bloodline. We were a young, desperate species, knocking on the door of a galactic community that viewed us as little more than talking apes. Our fleet was outdated. Our colonies were starving, and our only hope was the protection of King Frederick's mighty armada. I had stood in the Grand Court, swallowing my pride, offering myself to Princess Isabella, and she had laughed. She had stood before billions of viewers across the galaxy and spat in my face, choosing the treacherous Duke Alistair instead. That single rejection didn't just break my heart, it broke humanity's future. Alistair's syndicate immediately enforced a devastating embargo on Earth. Without Ethgard's protection, the alien coalition invaded. I spent the next 5 years watching my friends die, watching our cities burn, until the day the plasma fire finally took me. Then I gasped. My eyes snapped open. I was staring at a familiar gray metal ceiling. The hum of the Archimedes orbital station vibrated through the mattress beneath me. I threw off the sweat-soaked sheets and stumbled to the mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I braced my hands against the cold sink. The jagged plasma scar that had ruined the left side of my face was gone. My skin was smooth, untouched by the horrors of the coalition war. My trembling fingers pulled up the digital calendar on the wall terminal. The 12th of October 2024. 80. I choked back a sob that quickly morphed into a dark, hollow laugh. It was 3 days before the choosing ceremony. 3 days before Princess Isabella would publicly humiliate me and condemn 14 billion humans to slaughter. The universe, in some twisted stroke of cosmic irony, had hit the reset button. I was reborn. The panic faded instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I wasn't the naive, hopeful diplomat they had sent up here anymore. I had the memories of a 5-year war of extinction burned into my soul. I knew their tactics. I knew their secrets. And most importantly, I knew exactly what Duke Alistair was planning behind the king's back. I threw on my uniform, ignoring the traditional velvet ambassador's robes hanging in the closet. Those robes were a symbol of submission, a beggar's outfit. Instead, I strapped on my Terran military dress uniform. Midnight black with silver trim. Clear as throat. I marched down the sterile corridors of the station, the gravity boots clicking ominously against the deck. I bypassed the standard security checkpoints and slammed my palm against the biometric scanner of General Thomas Reed's office. The doors hissed open. Reed, the Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces, a man who had died in my arms during the siege of Mars in my past life, looked up from his desk, startled. Caleb Reed frowned, taking in my pale face and rigid posture. "What's the matter with you? The ceremony isn't for another 3 days. You should be resting." The psychologists at Lockheed Boeing explicitly said the pressure. "Cancel the velvet robes, Tom." I interrupted my voice, dropping to a growly whisper. I stepped forward, placing both hands flat on his desk. "We are changing the strategy immediately." Reed raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his leather chair. "Changing the strategy, son. The strategy is that you go down there, smile, and marry the alien princess so her father doesn't let the Vulpine Syndicate turn Earth into a parking lot. It's not complicated. She's going to reject me," I said flatly. "You don't know that. Intelligence says I don't care what military intelligence says. Our intel is blind." I leaned closer, staring intensely into the eyes of my old mentor. "I have highly classified off-the-books information. I need you to authorize Operation Firestorm." Reed's face drained of color. Operation Firestorm was a theoretical, highly classified doomsday protocol. It involved taking our entire stockpile of dark matter fusion mines weapons banned by the Geneva Accords of 2214 and quietly deploying them around the Omega Relay, the main hyperspace artery leading into our solar system. It was an act of war. Are you out of your mind? Reed whispered, standing up and checking the door to ensure we were alone. If the Ethel-Guardians catch us mining the Omega Relay, they'll annihilate us before the ceremony even begins. They won't catch us, I replied, my voice steady, anchored by the memories of a timeline that hadn't happened yet, because they aren't watching the relay. But Duke Alistair is. His private armada is already massing just outside sensor range. He's planning to blockade us the moment Isabella rejects the alliance. If we don't mind that relay now, we will be cut off from the outer colonies in less than 72 hours. Reed stared at me, searching my eyes for any sign of a mental breakdown. What he saw instead was the thousand-year stare of a veteran who had already lived through the apocalypse. How could you possibly know this, Caleb? He asked softly. Trust me, General. If I'm wrong, you can court-martial me. But if I'm right, I am about to save humanity from extinction. I stood at attention, offering a crisp salute. Give me the launch codes. Tom, let me flip the board. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the station's life support. Finally, Reed exhaled heavily, unlocking his secure drawer. He handed me the encrypted data pad. God help us, Caleb. Reed muttered. I took the pad, a cold smile, touching the corners of my mouth. God wouldn't be needed. Humanity was about to save itself. The grand spire of Ethgard was a monument to alien vanity. The massive ceremonial hall was constructed entirely of polished obsidian and a glowing crystalline mineral that pulsed with soft blue light. Suspended hundreds of feet above us were floating chandeliers, casting a golden aura over the thousands of alien nobles gathered to watch the primitive human beg for a place in their empire. Clear's throat. I stood at the base of the grand dais, completely ignoring the bewildered stars of the alien aristocrats. They were murmuring, pointing their long, elegant fingers at me. They had expected me to wear the submissive silk robes of a suitor. Instead, I stood tall in my crisp black military uniform, the medals of my past campaigns gleaming on my chest. My boots were polished to a mirror shine, and my posture screamed defiance, not deference. Trumpets made of hollowed leviathan bone echoed through the massive chamber. The crowd hushed. King Frederick entered first. He was a towering figure, over 7 feet tall, with skin the color of polished bronze and piercing violet eyes. He took his seat on the platinum throne, his gaze locking onto me with a mixture of curiosity and mild offense at my attire. Then she appeared. Princess Isabella walked down the grand staircase, draped in a gown of woven starlight. She was objectively terrifying in her beauty, but as I looked at her, all I saw was the ash of Earth's burning cities. I remembered the exact curve of her smirk when she doomed my species. I felt no awe. I felt only ice. She stopped at the center of the dais, looking down her nose at me. The condescension in her violet eyes was palpable. Welcome, emissaries of the stars. King Frederick's voice boomed, amplified by the crystalline architecture. Today, we honor the ancient tradition of the choosing. The Terran Coalition has offered their finest champion, Commander Caleb Wright, to join our royal house. Princess Isabella, my daughter, the floor is yours. Will you accept this union? The script was playing out exactly as it had in my first life. I knew her next words before she even drew the breath to speak them. Isabella turned away from me, dramatically, throwing her hands up toward her father. The entire hall held its breath. Father, I'll never choose a human, mate. Her voice rang out, sharp and mocking. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed quickly by a wave of cruel, scattered laughter. Isabella turned back to me, her eyes flashing with malice. Look at him, she sneered, her voice echoing off the obsidian walls. They are a primitive, violent race. Their bodies are fragile. They are short-lived, decaying after a mere century. They offer us nothing but their own desperation. I will not taint our divine bloodline with a creature from a dirt world. She dramatically gestured toward the shadows of the hall. I claim Duke Alistair of the Vulpine Syndicate. A partner of true wealth, power, and noble breeding. Right on cue. Duke Alistair stepped out of the crowd. He was a sleek reptilian humanoid, practically dripping in stolen jewels and smug satisfaction. He smiled at me, a terrifying expression, full of jagged teeth, thinking he had just won the galaxy. In my previous life, this was the moment I had fallen to my knees. I had begged the king to reconsider humiliating myself and my species while the court laughed. This time I didn't fall to my knees. Instead, I slowly raised my hands and began to clap. Clap, clap, clap. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, and incredibly loud in the sudden, confused silence of the hall. The alien laughter died in their throats. Isabella's smug smile faltered, replaced by a deep aristocratic confusion. King Frederick leaned forward on his throne, his brow furrowing. "You dare mock the crown's decision, human?" Alistair hissed his hand, resting on the ceremonial blade at his hip. I stopped clapping and let out a genuine hearty laugh. I casually adjusted my cuffs and looked up at the princess. "Mock you no, princess. I am thanking you." "Thanking me?" Isabella recoiled, genuinely thrown off balance. "You have just been rejected by the highest power in the cosmos. Your people will rot in isolation." "My people," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the vast hall, carrying the unyielding weight of human defiance, "were never going to ally with a stagnant, decaying empire run by a spoiled child." Gasps of pure outrage erupted from the nobles. Guards at the edge of the room gripped their energy pikes, waiting for the king's order to strike me down. But Frederick raised a hand, silencing them. He was intrigued. "Watch your tongue, Terran." King Frederick warned, his voice dangerously low. "You stand on the precipice of annihilation." "No, your majesty." "You do." I tapped the command module on my wrist. A massive three-dimensional holographic projection flared to life in the center of the room, illuminating the shocked faces of the court. It was a real-time tactical map of the Omega Relay. "You see, while your daughter was practicing her little speech," I announced, pacing slowly around the glowing hologram, "Duke Alistair's noble armada was secretly moving into position to blockade my solar system. An illegal act of war prepared entirely behind your back, King Frederick." Alistair's face turned the color of ash. "Lies. This is Terran trickery, is it?" I tapped another button. The holographic feed zoomed in. It showed Alistair's massive dreadnoughts, hundreds of them, exiting hyperspace near the human border. But they weren't moving. They were completely paralyzed. "Surprise, Duke." I smiled, a predator's grin. "Humanity might be short-lived, but we work fast. 48 hours ago, we seeded the entire Omega Quadrant with dark matter fusion mines. Your ships jumped right into the kill zone. At this exact moment, Earth's defense fleet has weapons lock on every single one of your dreadnoughts. If you flinch, I vaporize your entire syndicate's military power." Panic erupted in the hall. Isabella looked back and forth between me and Alistair, her arrogant facade shattering into pieces. King Frederick stood up slowly, the true gravity of the situation crashing down upon him. "You mind a civilian hyperlane?" The king breathed, horrified. "That is madness. You would risk the wrath of the entire galactic core." I looked dead into the king's eyes, letting him see the 5 years of hell I had lived through in a past life. "We are humanity, your majesty. When backed into a corner, madness is our standard operating procedure. We don't want an alliance anymore. From now on, you pay us for the use of the Omega Relay. And if anyone has a problem with it," I glanced over at the terrified Duke Alistair, "they can burn." The silence in the Grand Spire was no longer rooted in shock. It was suffocating under the weight of sheer, unadulterated terror. The holographic projection of the Omega Relay bathed the obsidian walls in a cold, unforgiving blue light, casting long shadows across the faces of the alien aristocracy. Duke Alistair's reptilian scales had lost their iridescent sheen, turning a sickly muted gray. He stumbled back a step, his clawed hands trembling as they hovered near his ceremonial blade. He looked at the projection, then to King Frederick. And finally back to me, his slit pupils dilated in panic. "This is a fabrication," Alistair bellowed, his voice cracking horribly. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Your Majesty, listen to reason. The Terran military is archaic. They still use combustion engines for atmospheric transit. They do not possess the stealth capabilities required to deploy a minefield of this scale without our sensor boys detecting them. This is a desperate, pathetic bluff from a dying race." I didn't even blink. I just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit right before the trap snaps shut. "You're right about one thing, Duke," I said, my voice, calm, projecting effortlessly across the vast hall. Our atmospheric tech is a bit dated. But when it comes to blowing things to absolute hell, humanity has been perfecting that art for 5,000 years. I tapped the console on my wrist again. Allow me to introduce Director James Harrington of Terran Naval Intelligence. The hologram shifted. Alongside the tactical map, a secondary window opened, displaying the gruff, unamused face of Director Harrington, broadcasting live from the command bunker in Geneva. Commander Wright. Harrington's voice crackled through the hall's speakers, completely devoid of the awe or reverence these aliens were accustomed to. We have multiple target locks confirmed on the Vulpine Syndicate fleet. Dark matter payload yield is currently set to maximum dispersal. Awaiting your execute order. Hold position, Director, I replied without taking my eyes off Alistair. The Duke was just telling the King that our minds are a bluff. Harrington let out a dry, rasping chuckle. I can detonate the Vanguard Dreadnought if the Duke requires a demonstration, Commander. Just say the word. Alistair shrieked, throwing his hands up. No, wait. King Frederick slammed his massive fist against the armrest of his platinum throne. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, instantly silencing the murmurs of the panicked nobles. The king rose to his full terrifying height. The violet aura that usually surrounded him in a display of regal power was flaring wildly, betraying his barely contained fury. Explain yourself, Alistair. Frederick rumbled his voice, shaking the crystal chandeliers above. Why was a Vulpine invasion fleet massing at the Terran border during a ceremony of peace? You bypassed the Royal High Command. You bypassed me. Alistair swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward Princess Isabella for support. But Isabella was staring at the floor, her face pale, her starlight gown suddenly looking absurdly out of place in a room that had just become a war room. My king, Alistair stammered, falling to one knee. It was a contingency. We knew the humans were deceitful. We merely positioned our forces to ensure they did not attempt a hostile takeover when the princess rightfully rejected their inferior offering. A contingency. I interrupted, my tone laced with heavy sarcasm. I tapped my wrist console one final time. Director Harrington, please play audio file Delta 9er Bravo. Copy that, Harrington replied. A scratchy intercepted comms recording filled the room. It was Alistair's voice, clear as day, speaking to his fleet admiral. The moment the arrogant princess refuses the ape, initiate the blockade. We starve Earth of resources for a month. Once they are broken, we offer them protection in exchange for their labor force. With the Terran industrial output under our direct control, King Frederick's armada will be vastly outnumbered. We march on the capital before the solstice. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. I had secured that recording in my previous life, pieced together from the wreckage of a downed Syndicate spy ship 3 years into the war. In this timeline, I simply knew exactly which encryption frequency to have Harrington hack. King Frederick's face was an unreadable mask of absolute rage. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply gestured with 2 fingers in terrifying unison. 50 royal guards stepped forward, igniting their plasma pikes. They formed a tight ring around Duke Alistair, the humming blades mere inches from his throat. The Duke collapsed entirely, sobbing, pressing his face against the polished obsidian floor. Take him to the deep cells, Frederick ordered softly. He will be executed for high treason at dawn. As the guards dragged the screaming, thrashing Duke out of the Grand Hall, King Frederick slowly turned his gaze back to me. The condescension was gone. In its place was a weary, calculating respect. Then motion caught my eye. Princess Isabella was rushing down the stairs of the Dis, abandoning her regal composure. She stopped right in front of me, her violet eyes wide, filling with manufactured tears. She reached out, her delicate pale hands trembling as she tried to grasp my arm. Commander Caleb. She breathed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I had no idea. He deceived me. He deceived us all. I was blinded by his lies. But I see the truth now. The strength of humanity. Your strength is undeniable. I take back my words. Let us forge this alliance. I choose you. I looked down at her hands, then up into her pleading eyes. I saw the same alien who, in another life, had ordered orbital strikes on civilian refugee camps just to break our spirit. My blood ran ice cold. I took a deliberate step back, letting her hands fall to her sides. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet loud enough to carry. "And do not insult my intelligence. You didn't choose me because you thought I was weak. You chose him because you are arrogant, cruel, and foolish. And my people do not ally themselves with fools." Isabella gasped, her face flushing with profound humiliation. She looked to her father, but King Frederick slowly shook his head, refusing to intervene. "So, what now, Commander?" the king asked heavily. "You hold the Omega Relay. You have exposed a traitor. What are Earth's terms?" "My terms are simple, Your Majesty," I replied, adjusting the cuffs of my black uniform. "We govern the Omega Relay. Any ship passing through human space pays a 20% transit tariff in raw refinement materials. And if a single Vulpine Syndicate ship so much as pings our radar, I detonate the mines and collapse the hyperlane, permanently isolating your empire from the outer rim." Frederick's jaw tightened. "That is extortion." "No." I smiled coldly, turning my back on the princess. "That's business. See you at the treaty, signing, Your Majesty." 3 months. That was all it took to rewrite the balance of power in the Orion Cygnus arm. I stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Aegis Command Station, a massive, heavily armed fortress orbiting Earth. General Thomas Reed stood beside me, sipping black coffee from a ceramic mug, watching the endless stream of alien freighters queued up at the customs checkpoints. In my previous life, Earth's orbit was a graveyard of shattered hulls and frozen corpses. Today, it was the wealthiest, most heavily fortified toll booth in the galaxy. "Revenues are up another 15% this week," Reed muttered, shaking his head in disbelief as he tapped his datapad. "Governor Montgomery says the Mars terraforming project is now fully funded for the next century just from the tariffs we collected on Ethel-Guardian spice freighters. They have to pay, Tom," I said, leaning against the reinforced glass. "Without the Omega Relay, it takes them 4 light-years of sublight travel to reach their mining colonies. Time is money, even for aliens." "Still," Reed sighed, looking out at the stars. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. King Frederick isn't used to being dictated to, and the remnants of the Vulpine Syndicate have been awfully quiet since we executed Duke Alistair." I narrowed my eyes. I knew the quiet wouldn't last. In my past life, the Vulpines were fanatical. Cutting off the head of the snake only made the body thrash violently. Right on cue, the station's klaxons began to blare. The ambient lighting shifted to a pulsing tactical red. "General Commander," Captain David O'Connor's voice echoed through the comms from the CIC. "We have multiple unauthorized slip space ruptures on the dark side of the moon. Sensor profiles identify them as Vulpine stealth cruisers. They bypassed the outer perimeter, boys." Reed slammed his coffee mug down. "They're making a run for the relay. If they destroy the control hub, the mines disarm." "Let them come," I said, a dark sense of satisfaction washing over me. I had been waiting for this. I knew their stealth tech relied on thermal masking. I also knew it was completely useless against kinetic gravity sensors. Captain O'Connor, execute the Montgomery pincer, pin them against the lunar gravity well. I watched through the observation window as the black void of space suddenly lit up with the brilliant blue streaks of human rail gunfire. The Terran heavy destroyers, retrofitted with Ethel-Guardian shielding, purchased with our new tariff money, broke from their defensive formations. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The Vulpine stealth cruisers dropped out of cloak, their hulls already shattering under the sheer kinetic force of human tungsten rounds. We didn't use elegant plasma or lasers. We used mass and velocity. It was brutal, primitive, and entirely unstoppable. Within 10 minutes, the entire rogue fleet was reduced to burning debris, drifting harmlessly into the lunar surface. Target locks confirmed. Neutralized. O'Connor reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. 0 Terran casualties. Reed let out a long breath, wiping sweat from his brow. He turned to look at me. The same look of aid terror in his eyes that I had seen in King Frederick's. "How did you know they'd use thermal stealth?" "Because arrogance makes you predictable." I lied smoothly. "Is the diplomatic shuttle ready?" Reed nodded slowly. "They just docked at Bay 4. I adjusted my collar and made my way down to the central reception hall of the Aegis. Today was the final nail in the coffin of my past life. The blast doors hissed open. King Frederick walked in, flanked by a minimal honor guard. The towering alien monarch looked exhausted. The deep bronze of his skin had faded, and the violet aura of his power was dim. He had spent the last 3 months dealing with the political fallout of his shattered economy and the humiliating realization that humanity held a knife to his empire's throat. Following closely behind him, carrying the heavy velvet train of his royal robes, was Princess Isabella. She wore no woven starlight today. She was dressed in the muted gray silk of a subordinate attendant. Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped. The arrogant, cruel princess who had laughed at me on a galactic broadcast was gone, replaced by a broken aristocrat who was finally learning the consequences of her vanity. I stood at the head of the long obsidian conference table, a deliberate mock of their own throne room architecture, flanked by General Reed and Director Harrington, King Frederick. I greeted him, my voice, flat and authoritative. "Welcome to Earth." Frederick didn't bother with pleasantries. He walked to the table, his eyes lingering on the massive viewport that showcased the debris of the Vulpine fleet burning in the distance. He swallowed hard. "We felt the tremors through the relay," the king said quietly. "Just a minor pest control issue, Your Majesty," I replied smoothly. "The Vulpine Syndicate remnants have been permanently liquidated. Consider it a complimentary service from the Terran Coalition." I slid a thick-bound document across the table. The Treaty of Archimedes. It solidifies our absolute control over the Omega Relay, establishes Terran military bases in the 3 adjacent star systems, and requires Ethgard to share all Class 4 medical and agricultural technologies with Earth. Frederick stared at the document. He knew he had no choice. If he refused, his empire would starve. He slowly reached into his robes, produced a crystalline stylus, and signed his name. As he stepped back, Isabella finally raised her head. Her violet eyes met mine. There was no hatred left in them, only a profound, desperate regret. She looked at the scarred human who had outmaneuvered the oldest empire in the stars, knowing she could have stood beside me. Instead, she was nothing more than a witness to my rise. "It is done, Commander," King Frederick said, his voice hollow. "Humanity has its place among the stars." I picked up the signed treaty, feeling the weight of 14 billion saved lives in my hands. The orbital lasers would never fall on Earth. My friends would not die. The future was ours. "We didn't just take our place, Your Majesty," I said, a genuine terrifying smile finally breaking across my face. "We took the whole damn board." And that is how humanity flips the script. From the brink of extinction to holding the entire galactic economy in the palm of their hands, Caleb proved that you should never underestimate a species forged in fire. Did you love seeing Isabella forced to carry her father's train at the end? Let me know your favorite moment of Caleb's master plan in the comments below. If you enjoyed this epic HFY Reborn story, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it to keep the human resistance going. Wrong.